have any real world advice about negotiation and trying to get a deal done? Or is it just roll with like the buyer or the situation?
Well, we've had some instances here lately. We've had some low appraisals. We've probably had 5 or 6 in the last month. And that's the true telltale sign of a changing market, right? When the appraisals are not meeting what the homes are selling for. Some of these appraisals we kind of knew they were coming, right? You know, you can kind of predict it, but you had an unrealistic seller at a certain price and the buyer was willing to pay it, but yet the bank wasn't willing to lend on it at that price. So we had to go back and renegotiate price after the low appraisal came in, or we had to have the buyer, you know, bring additional money to closing. Or we had one deal that neither one of those things were gonna happen. The seller wasn't willing to negotiate on price. The buyer didn't have money to come up and make up the difference. So unfortunately that buyer lost out. And you know, besides just losing out on the house, you know, he had inspections, he had the cost of the appraisal, he had a survey that was done. There was a lot that went into that, you know, that money was lost because of a changing market, you know, and there's a little bit of risk when buying a home, and that's, you know, one of the things that people don't think about is, you know, what happens if? What happens if? So we're starting to work on, with our agents, them looking at like, what's gonna happen? Maybe talk to the listing agent beforehand. Like, what happens if we do get a low appraisal, if you're kind of concerned a little bit about the price, right? Have that conversation up front with the other agent so you kind of have a plan B set up, to where it's not gonna be just this huge shock and all of a sudden you got a listing agent that couldn't even believe that the house didn't appraise, oh my gosh. Now you've got a buyer that you didn't tell anything to and he's completely shocked, thinks you don't know what the hell you're doing because you let him offer on a house that wasn't worth what the appraisal was. And then you got a seller that the other agent's gotta go back to and go like, oh, by the way, your house didn't appraise. Like, if the agent's not having that tough conversation with the seller on the front end, they're not doing their job.
And with the buyer.
And with the buyer. Like, the buyer needs to know, like, hey, this thing, I pulled the comps, I looked at what else, like, I know you're willing to pay this, but we don't have a bunch of supporting data to support this price. The reason the prices are still listed at that, though, is a lot to do with the inventory. Because guess what? The guy who lost out, that was the only house in this price point in the area he wanted to be in. They didn't have a choice but to write the offer, right? So, you know, buyers need to understand the risk sometimes that goes into this process because we can't control it, right? And if you're a listing agent, you've got to sell a home 3 times. 3 times, he says? He doesn't understand 3 times? 1, you got to sell it to the buying agent. They've got to believe that the house is, you know, worth the money you're listing it for. 2, you got to sell it to the potential buyer, right? He's got to be invested in realizing, yes, this home is worth X, Y, and Z, and be willing to make an offer. And then number 3, you got to sell it to the appraiser. And that's where a lot of agents drop the ball. They don't help the appraisers see the value in the home. They don't put appraisal packs out. They don't talk to the appraiser and say, hey, you know, these are the comps I used. I know you technically you probably can't use them, but hey, this may help you understand where we came up with the price. And that's something that's not taught in real estate school. That's something that's not taught in every brokerage, not taught by every team leader. You have to understand there's things you can do behind the scenes to help make deals happen.